Good evening, beautiful people. Welcome to the Amplify series. My name is Perone Yousafzadeh. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am zooming in from the ancestral and unceded land of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill, colonially known as Rochester, New York. I want to take a moment to pay respect and give thanks to their elders past and present who have stewarded this land for generations, and to acknowledge the additional environmental impact and carbon footprint created by the technologies and structures we are using to gather here virtually tonight. If you would like to acknowledge the native land where you reside, please feel free to do so in the chat, and you can also use the resource I'm popping in now to find out if you don't already know. We at GIVA were so inspired by the Rochester Museum and Science Center's Changemakers exhibit, which you still have time to check out before it closes on May 16th. This exhibit is a beautiful reminder of the incredible richness and history of activism and advocacy here in Rochester, and the fact that our changemakers are not just part of our past, they are a vital part of our present. So we created Tenacious Women, Shaping Change in Rochester and Beyond, to further celebrate and uplift these stories. We've commissioned 20 professional playwrights here in Rochester and across the country to tell these stories. We've also commissioned 5 young writers to tell the stories of 5 living changemakers. And tonight, we are honored to host 3 living changemakers and our wonderful moderator in a conversation about disability justice, the first of 3 conversations as part of Tenacious Women. We'll have time in the final 15 minutes of our hour together for a Q&A, so please feel free to use the chat or Q&A function to ask your questions, and I'll make sure that they get to our panelists. And now I'll briefly introduce our panelists. You can read their incredible full-length bios on our website, which I'll pop in the chat for you momentarily. Anita Cameron has been Not Dead Yet's Director of Minority Outreach since 2017. She has met with national and state policymakers and was published in the National Council on Disabilities report on the dangers of assisted suicide as public policy. As a Black disabled lesbian, Anita has used her experience of discrimination to promote understanding among groups of disenfranchised people in terms of social justice. Let's please welcome Anita. Feel free to turn your camera on if you like. Luticha André Doucette graduated from the Rochester Institute of Technology with a degree in bioinformatics. And after graduating, she was a fellow at the University of Rochester, where she worked in a genomics lab. She is the owner of Catalyst Consulting, which helps organizers examine equity across race, gender identity, and disability in policies, practices, procedures, and relationships. Jeiri Flores is a strong, passionate Puerto Rican disability rights activist from Rochester, New York. She earned her bachelor's degree in the study of sociology and African American studies at SUNY Rockport in 2014. She is currently pursuing her master's degree in human development at the University of Rochester. Jeiri serves as a resource for residents in her community by connecting them to existing services and supports. She shares her unique perspective at colleges and conferences, where she introduces attendees to the struggles and invisibility people with disabilities face. And last is Stephanie Woodward, an attorney and founder of Disability Empower Network, an organization dedicated to empowering disabled girls and women to live to their fullest potential and have the confidence to lead. She has been an organizer with the disability rights group ADAPT for over a decade and has worked to enforce and expand the rights of people with disabilities nationwide. Let's please welcome our panelists. Panelists, if you'd like to turn your cameras on, by all means.
It looks like that's been disabled.
Oh no. Hold on one moment. Let's fix that. Stand by. I'm working on fixing these video issues here. Give me just one moment. How about this? I'm gonna try Um, adding y'all as some co-hosts and see if that takes care of it. This is a wonderful moment for us to practice patience and grace here and celebrate the fallibility of the human experience. Okay. We should all be set now. I'm going to go back to the wings. Take it away, panelists. And as always, friends, feel free to pop your questions in the chat or use the Q&A function. Thanks and enjoy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad and happy to be here with you all. And actually, there are some of my favorite people on this panel, so I'm also super excited to share space with them as well. And so my first question, and we'll kind of round robin this if this makes it easier, because the screens jump anyway, so round robin seems like what the universe wants. Our first question will be, can you tell us a bit about your individual path in your journey towards advocacy and activism? So we'll start with Anita. Big sis, if you don't mind, you're the first person on my screen.
Okay. Sure. Well, my name's Anita Cameron. I am, let me get a brief kind of description. So I'm a Black woman with long locks, and I have on a kind of multicolored, like pink, fuchsia, purple, like a teal and black sweater on. So yeah, that's me. Well, let's see. So I was born in Chicago, Illinois, in 1965. When I was born, disabled kids didn't have the right to an education. I was born with multiple disabilities. And so when I was in the 5th grade, idea came into idea in Section 504 came in. And by the time I was 16, I was out of the house in college, living with nuns, because I was a good little Catholic girl and I was gonna, become a nun. And so the nuns taught me about social justice and social change. And so I started working on anti-nuclear issues, homelessness, anti-apartheid. My first arrest was jumping the fence at a nuclear power plant in downstate Illinois. And I then started doing work with the LGBTQ community because I came out at the age of 21. And later that year, I joined the disability rights movement. I joined ADAPT and began organizing with ADAPT. So I went to Colorado in '87, went to Pennsylvania in '93. During that time, shortly before, I was I helped to organize and was the national representative for the 1993 March on Washington. At that time, it was lesbian, gay, bisexual. Yeah, fortunately, we've added in everybody, and trans folks are part of our circle. Over the decades, being involved in disability rights, I didn't have a life, if you will. And so I incorporated all of that into everything that I did. So I got involved in like CERT, which is Community Emergency Response Team, emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness, and recruited people disabled people to become CERTs. Along the way, I kind of became a writer, if you will. I've always been a writer, but certainly, in my career in disability rights movement and whatnot, I did and do a lot of writing. What else? I mean, there's just, thinking about it, I think most people know me for being the loudmouth and the person that gets arrested all of the time. But I am pretty well-rounded. I'm an avid reader, and yeah, I think I'll just kind of stop right there, in case folks later on, have questions. But that's my road in this long, winding, sense here. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you so much. Seeing you was like seeing me for the first time in this movement. So I appreciate you and all that you've done. I'm going to move on next to Stephanie. Would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks. For a quick visual description, for anyone who cannot see me right now, I am a white woman with dark reddish curly hair, and there is an image behind me that is black and white of people with disabilities protesting with my favorite protest sign that says "Asking did not work." So I am a proud disabled woman. I have been part of the disability rights movement since I want to say 19. I actually joined, and Anita was my first boss in a disability rights world. So that was pretty exciting. And since then, I have gone to law school to specifically be able to practice law in the area of disability rights, whether that is litigation or in policy. And most recently, I co-founded Disability Empower Her Network, which focuses on empowering girls with disabilities, because we recognize that girls and women with disabilities are not in leadership positions, and we can be and should be. And so we want to work from a starting point of empowering girls with disabilities to know their worth and to know that they are able to achieve anything.
Thank you. And Luticha, can you give us a little breakdown? I mean, you do a lot of work, but
Hey y'all. So for those who need the visual description, I like to say I am a honey skin Black woman who's wearing a hot pink head wrap with a bun high up into the sky and giant teal rose earrings and clear glasses. So that's me. I guess my advocacy journey, I was born not disabled in Okinawa, Japan in 1983 and sustained a traumatic brain injury and a spinal cord injury Memorial Day weekend of 1985 while we were here in the United States. And so I think from the jump, trying to advocate as a Black loudmouth little person within the healthcare sphere that did not understand how to deal with a spinal cord injury and a brain injury in someone so young. And so advocacy is just kind of been like part and parcel, but also having the wonderful privilege of a very long lineage of advocates in my family. Even my grandmother, who I am named after, was one who organized Black voters in Jim Crow South. So in New Orleans specifically. And her husband, my grandfather, was part of many Black workers in the post office who successfully sued in order to get the actual jobs and created unions for Black postal workers in New Orleans. So, you know, advocacy from all different ways have been a part of who I am. So I say that I have been advocating for the past 36 years in various forms, not always through forms of like litigation. Usually it's education or internal policy change with organizations, etc. Or what I like to call, I'm a natural disruptor, right? Like as soon as I come into a space and it's not equitable, like I shake things up, and I always try to make sure that things don't start and end with me, but making sure that I make change so that those who are coming after me can, you know, at least have some barriers removed, maybe not all. So I think that's been my advocacy journey.
Thank you. So we'll start backwards. We'll start with you first again, Luticha, and this next question. And so folks might be familiar with the concept of intersectionality. It's kind of like a buzzword right now. It's a hot topic. I actually just did a panel last week on intersectionality, so it's really on key for the work that all of us here on this panel do. So really, we want to, if you could tell us a bit about the audience, or excuse me, I'm sorry, everything in my house makes noise. Can you tell us or about intersectionality a bit more and how it manifests specifically in the disability community?
Not bad. So for those who don't know, intersectionality was kind of put into, it had been around for a little bit, but Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black woman and scholar, kind of really wrote about this in 1989. So it's been around for a minute, right? And what she was really describing was the intersection and how racism and sexism often impact Black women. So she was trying to really describe the very specific type of aggressions. I don't call them microaggressions, they're just aggressions that Black women face, whether they be in the workplace, in school, or in just everyday life. And so, you know, as a disabled Black person, you know, who's very, you know, femme presenting, that intersection I think is really key. So oftentimes, you know, for me, it's people touching me without my permission, whether it be my hair or my head wrap, or thinking that they just have access to my body in general in ways that, you know, I never really give permission, especially in a healthcare setting, which I just had this happen yesterday, which is people just touching me and rubbing me and me saying, you know, please don't do that. And so oftentimes as a disabled person, that like access to your body, that we can either move your wheelchair, touch you without your express consent, is just another added layer to those intersections. So that's how I try to explain what intersectionality means, just as me in this disabled body mind.
Stephanie, we'll have you go next if you don't mind, or if you are.
Yeah, I think I really appreciated Luticha bringing up Kimberly Crenshaw and the history of intersectionality. I think it's super important to recognize that this comes from Black women, and we need to honor that and also respect that. That is not, I hope that we're not using it as some trendy thing, and yet it is the hot thing to do right now, right? So as a woman with a disability, my intersectionality is not nearly to the point that other multiply marginalized disabled people experience. And I think that part of my honoring intersectionality is recognizing that my voice doesn't need to be amplified as much, but that I can be a great ally by amplifying other people's voices and taking a step back, or in my case, a rollback, so that we can hear from the different experiences of disabled people, because I think that there is this concept that all disabled people experience the same things, when in fact, all of our experiences are completely different. And some of us experience so many different layers of discrimination depending on our intersectional identities. So my goal is always to recognize my place as someone who is in a place of privilege because I'm a white woman, and that I can easily take a roll back to allow other people to have that voice in the conversation. And with that, I would love to pass it to Anita.
Sis, I know we talked about this at length last week, and I would love if you bring up some of the stuff that we talked about, especially the piece of, and I don't mean to push you because I didn't push anybody else, so I don't take this personal, but I would love specifically the piece of like how like all of your intersections oppress you in some shape, way, or form, and really just describing that and what that looks like for you as a woman of color who also happens to be part of the LGBTQ, who also happens to be disabled. Like there's, I don't want to describe all the pieces of you because that's not my place to tell your story, but however you'd like to answer this question, if you could really, give us the real raw, real fast, I'd appreciate that. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I joke that if people wanted to look up the word, intersectionality or intersectional in the dictionary, they find my picture there. So I am a Black disabled lesbian who is also Afro-Latina and Choctaw. I'm live in relative poverty, which is another, I think the thing that kind of irritates me about this term intersectional or intersectionality that Professor Crenshaw coined in '89, people use it interchangeably with the word diversity, and they are two vastly different things. And it's a buzz thing now. I mean, 9909. I mean, the word's been around for like 32 years or something, but we just kind of glommed on that word, a few years ago, and so I think a lot of times either we use it to mean diversity when in fact it does not mean that. Or we have people who tend to think that there is no intersectionality. I had an exchange with someone who wanted someone to speak on police brutality and disabled, but did not want to speak on, when you're talking about police brutality, and the things that happen, you can't even begin to discuss that without bringing up race, without bringing up that in the case of Black folks, we're 3 times more likely to be brutalized, murdered, or whatever by these police. And certainly that out of Black people in particular, the numbers fluctuate from 33% to 50% of us are disabled. So you can't talk about that and without mentioning race, that intersection of race and disability, and because you just can't. So either some people who think, oh, it's just another form of diversity, or you have these people that think, oh, well, I'm going to talk about disabled and leave out, race, or gender expression and all, or we're gonna talk about, the Black community without, looking at, women, LGBTQ, so on, or talk about women and not, look at the other intersections of women who live in poverty, women who, still have unequal rates of pay to other men, and then add in the Black, and that just makes it, or add in, being Latina or being indigenous, and hello. So intersectionality means a lot to me. I don't even navigate my life without, and I will say that I did try to do that. And, when I was the first 25 years in the disability rights movement, I did try to do that, but I couldn't separate, I can't separate those parts of myself. I can't separate disability, which is another intersection of oppression that I'm in. I can't separate being a woman, or a lesbian, or Black, or someone living, in relative poverty. I can't separate that. And so I stopped. We still have a lot to, as we talk about intersectional themes and intersectionality, it's still a rough subject to talk about once you start talking about race. So I'm gonna leave it right there, but yeah.
I feel you. That's I want to say that's a great place to leave it, but that's such a heavy place to leave it. So there's what I will add to what the panel has said, and they've been so, cohesive in what they've said, is that it's impossible to talk about intersectionality without talking about structural ableism and structural racism, right? They come hand in hand, and the way things all kind of play out in our society and how we see them, we can't compartmentalize them. We gotta, make sure we see people whole as we function and as we move through our different stages of life. And it's really important to recognize the effects that all of these things play on each other. And because we are with Jiva, so this specifically, we're going to look at intersectionality through the eyes of the arts and representation. And what do we see on TV? What are we seeing on our stages? What are we seeing in the books being written, in the blogs or whatever? Really, when we think of art and when we think of people with disability, how do we see that? So if we really transition our conversation to be inclusive of intersectionality and the disability experience, when we look on stage, when we look on TV, what is the representation of disability like? What is the narrative that is being created and driven? And so this is a toss-up. Whoever like to answer it first can go first. I have my own answer, and I really struggle with my answer, wanting to answer this first, because I'm not on the panel, I'm just the moderator. So I will be my best supporting cast and let the main cast go first.
Well, Melissa Thompson, or was she the one? Someone created it. Disability So White, right? So all you see, whether it's on TV, if you get to see disabled people on TV, are white folk. You had the one Black guy on NCIS New Orleans, but he gone now from the show. So, all of what we've been talking about, whether it be representation in film, books, TV, is either a white representation or some sort of non-disabled person's view of what being disabled is, right? Which is never really positive. If you in a horror movie, you finna die really quickly. If you are, when we look at all of this and saying like, wow, why do we have these tropes about various people, from like those who are Intellectually disabled, you think of Mice and Men, right? If you see some sort of disabled character, often they're subservient and serve as some sort of foil for the white person to learn something about themselves and go off and be great, while you never see, the story of that disabled Black person like ever. So we see this over and over and over and over again in these types of films. The Green Mile is another one of kind of like the spiritual disabled Black person that, saves all the white folk, but still ends up dying in the end, right? And so it's never really a positive view on our lives within the arts. I know I really am thankful for Jiva for always listening to my loud mouth. But we've talked about even how theaters are structured, right? Not a lot of seating for disabled audiences. Like if I were to bring 100 friends in wheelchairs, we would not be able to even get in to see the show. Or even thinking about, that's just in the audience, but what about backstage? How do you get on the stage? How do you do costumes, etc.? Like, how do you do the lighting? I used to do tech for community theater, and sometimes it was just very hard to kind of get backstage in order to do what is needed to be done, because nobody's thinking about, someone in a wheelchair within these spaces. And even how plays are done. We only have so many plays that have been put out there, but what about plays from disabled playwrights? What are you reading? And how are you putting that out there? And this is why I really enjoy, Sense Invalid or Kinetic Light, really pushing the boundaries of what art looks like, or even, watching disabled burlesque. What does that even look like? So people need to understand that the arts is for everyone. And so what does that look like, and how do you make your arts inclusive, and what are you consuming, right? Some of my clients say that they have never, until they've met me, consumed any art, whether it be books, poetry, videos, anything by and for disabled individuals. So that's really huge. And so if you can't see us as human beings, as you often say, JD, what does that even mean, and about our expression, our thoughts, our feelings? And we aren't getting the fullness of what it means to be Black and disabled, right? You've got 2 members of the LGBTQ community representing Rainbow Coalition. What does that even look like in TV, music, all of that? And shout out to Crip Hop Nation for also giving us hip hop from the disabled experience as well. So that's kind of what I have to say about that.
So funny you mentioned burlesque. I'm sorry, Anita. It's so funny you mentioned that, because then you would have to also admit that people with disabilities can be sexy and can be provocative and be seen as sexual beings. So that opens the door for a whole other conversation in terms of what art and what art looks like today.
Right?
You wanted to go next.
Yeah, I think so. This, Anita, oddly enough, I don't watch much TV or anything, like that. I'm kind of a nerd, so NASA Channel and Science Channel and all that stuff for me. But I noticed that it seems like one of the things that one of the tropes I often see, with Black disabled in films is they got disabled through gang violence. And I think that, in terms of like the arts, movie theater and stuff like that, it's like, what is it that we disabled people are always supposed to send a message? What if our message is, my message is I'm just a woman living in this world, trying to make my way. And yeah, I happen to have disabilities, but what does it always got to be about the disability that's front and center? Either I got in an accident and got a disability, and so now I would rather be dead, because there are movies that depict that too, rather better dead than disabled, acting as if we have no quality of life or whatever. And so I wish that like the arts did, that there was more just people people with disabilities, disabled people just being there because we there, not that we have to send a message, not that we have to do a particular thing, just that we, I'm not a disabled housewife. I'm a housewife, not a disabled teacher, or disabled grocery store worker or whatever. I'm just a person out there in this world trying to get back. And it so happens that I may have a disability, whether it's a physical disability, or I may have an intellectual disability, or a mental health disability, or a neuroatypical like autism or something. Why just can't that? I'm sick of, having done 40 years of activism and activists and all that stuff. I'm tired of trying to give a message. You know what I mean? Can my message be, I'm Anita and I'm here and I'm doing the work that needs to be done? That's kind of where I am with that as a geek who doesn't take into arts as much as I would like to.
I respect it. I do for sure. I think you're right. Because sometimes we don't have a message, right? Stephanie, would you answer next?
Yeah, so first, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that there have been some questions about captions. I've already written this in the chat, so if people can't hear me. But if you do need captions and we aren't providing them, please let us know. I think that it would be inappropriate for us to continue if people are not able to access this event. And that I think all of the panelists would probably agree that we're in solidarity with anyone who needs captions, and we would want to reschedule for a time that would be accessible to everybody. So pop that in the chat if this is impacting you. But when it comes to media, I think that like Anita and Luticha have covered a lot. I do think that we could actually be here for another 8 hours talking just on this subject as well. Some of the very lowest hanging fruit, like have disabled characters played by disabled people. Like this is something that the disability community has been screaming about forever. And we are still having non-disabled people play us in these different roles and in no way represent us well. So that is one of the first things that's really frustrating. I know that Luticha and Anita had talked about like these storylines, like why can't we just be boring? But like also, why do we have to want to die? Like the amount of disabled people in films and TV who want to die because of their disability. Like Me Before You was not a romantic film for the disability community. You're telling me a man gets a disability, is rolling in all that dough, meets a woman he falls in love with, and then is like, you know what I want to do? I'm going to kill myself and give you all my money. Who in the world thinks that's romantic? Like, I can't fathom why anybody is like pouring themselves into this thinking, oh my God, like I'm so amazed by this, because you know what? If my partner decided he wanted to go kill himself because he was in a wheelchair, I don't think I would find that romantic. So those are some of the things that I think are really frustrating. And Luticha had mentioned in the horror movies, you're either killed real quick or you are the murderer. People with mental health disabilities are always represented in some scary and menacing way. And that's simply not what mental health disabilities are. You're actually more likely to be a victim of violence than a perpetrator of violence. So, and that helps push all of these stereotypes in our communities, because when you see it happening in the movies that somebody was quote unquote crazy and did the violence, then when we have shootings in schools, we say that it must be because they were crazy or they were disabled in some other way. And that's not fair to the disability community. And I think one of the last things I really want to mention is, why are all the characters played by the same people? So yeah, disability is so white, but like also so white by the same exact actors over and over again, as if like no other disabled people exist. So if you need a deaf person in a movie, you're just calling Marley Matlin. No one else exists. Right now, if you need someone in a wheelchair, only Ellie Stroker apparently can play the role. So there are other disabled people in the world. There are multiply marginalized disabled people in the world. There are lesbians, there are Black people, there are, like, pick it. We are disabled, all of us, like, put us in these roles. And I think one of the other things is the stage. Luticha mentioned the stage being inaccessible. I think that this was really amplified not enough when Ella Stroker won a Tony and they made her wait backstage to find out if she won, because she wouldn't be able to climb the steps to the stage to accept the award if she had won. And she did win. And everyone was celebrating that a woman in a wheelchair won a Tony, and this is a big deal. Nobody was mentioning, and they made this woman who is so talented that she won a Tony, they made her wait backstage to find out if she won, because they couldn't bother to hold the event in an accessible venue. So those are just a few things on my wish list.
Or God forbid, put a ramp so that she could have, like.
Could you imagine that? Like in the middle of the aisle, they'd be like, "Ah, there's a ramp. How dare you?" Because that'd have been too much. It would have took up too much floor space. Then they would have been so sad, because it's like, well, we're gonna build a ramp for one person. Why? They won't talk about, like, or maybe the elder actors who might have needed the ramp too, who struggle up them steps every award season. But who knows? So
why do we look? We can send a probe out to interstellar space, okay? But we can't figure out how to put a freaking ramp on a stage, or you see where, they have these choirs and all of the disabled kids are segregated because you can't get them together. Look, we can clone animals, we can damn near make cyborgs of ourselves, but we can't do simple access. I don't get that. That's just really on my nerves.
It is like just out of pocket. I remember doing the holiday pops. And so that backstage is like really, really small. And even if I could stand, I'm really, really short. So thanks, Mom, for that. And so when, the choir was singing, Jeff Tyzik would wear special socks every performance so that I could actually see him conduct, because I couldn't see him because everyone else was, like, the musicians, etc., were in the way. And so, he figured it out. We can figure things out in the spaces that we have, right? Like, if she gonna win this Tony, then have the tech crew get a giant palanquin and carry her like the goddess that she is, with, like, music or whatever. Like, we can do these things, and we are creative, but don't want to use that creativity for just the basics, right? And giving someone their props when they win an award and make it extra special because of that. So I think, like, really thinking about, just like with this conversation, if we're having a conversation about disability, we figure out the access beforehand to make sure that everyone is included, right? We don't need to have people request those accommodations. We have to make that happen from the thought, from the jump, right? So really just making sure that we lead with that creativity every day, all day, in all ways, for all people.
Listen, especially since Machu Picchu was accessible, you can't tell me nothing. And for a long time after I figured this out and I heard this, I said Machu Picchu is accessible. There's no way that you can tell me you can't make something. And Machu Picchu is made of rocks and grass, and they figure something out. There's a whole team of people who you just contact and you say, hey, I want to see Machu Picchu. And this team of like 7 folks, they get together and they will take you up Machu Picchu. So this is something that can be figured out. So we have 10 minutes left and we were supposed to give questions for 15. I want to transition now, and I'm sorry if I cut any of you off. For the question and answer segment of this, we do have a question in the Q&A, but as folks are thinking about things, please put them in the chat, and we will figure this out as we go. Bear with me because reading while like on live always makes me nervous. So this first question comes from Tori, and they ask, we're a year into this pandemic. How can we convince non-disabled orgs to take virtual access, i.e. live captions or of any sort, seriously, and prioritize checking accessibility of events ahead of time? Also, thoughts on how this will change as places transition back into in-person and what best practices should be. It feels absurd to still be fighting for basics, and I am also worried current bits of access will disappear again.
So if I can just say, like, asking those questions to non-disabled people is like a big start. Like for me, and I think for everyone on this panel, we are very surprised that there's no captions here because we are so used to like that just being a basic for us in our community that I don't think any of us even thought to ask that, because we're living in a world where like we provide that, right? So I think we need to keep confronting these systems, and it's exhausting because disabled people are the ones expected to do this work and the ones expected to educate non-disabled people for non-disabled people to say, wow, that's great. You should go tell those people that too. And I'm like, but you know the message now. What? Like, help lift up the work, share the load. And why don't you tell non-disabled people this too? Because honestly, sometimes non-disabled people hear this message better from non-disabled people, whether or not that's the right thing. It's kind of like how men hear ideas of sexism better from other men, like, which only perpetuates more issues. But nonetheless, when we're trying to get to a solution, I'll take as many allies as we can.
Yeah, I think like I'm very shocked because as I said, I would have stopped the presses until that had been figured out. Just because that's just my brand and who I am as an individual, that everyone needs to enjoy at the same level as everyone else. And also that I think in this time, and I share those fears, that all this accessibility and access that we've gained, virtual tours and, you know, Zoom, everything, that there is a tendency now to quote unquote go back to normal, even though that normal was not inclusive and totally sucked and wasn't really working for anybody, right? And so a lot of that has to come from education. A lot of that also, unfortunately, probably will come in the form of lawsuits. I've did some research in that in the before time, 70% of reasonable accommodations that went into litigation were ruled in favor of the employer to not have remote access for workers, right, who requested that. And from what I'm hearing is that some employers are saying that they're going to cut people's pay if they continue to use remote work, etc., which is just a huge workers' rights violation. So I think there is going to need to be some strong litigation as well as strong advocacy, because it's a both and for me, because I operate, you know, from a disability justice perspective, and that not all solutions require litigation. But yeah, I think it's going to be using platforms like this, you know, when the mess up happens, to really address it and say, you know, let's do better, as well as, you know, making it part of policy, you know, from now on, just do it. Like, you ain't got a Zoom has a function, you know, for captions now. And that came as a result of lots of advocacy. So just do it. It might change the structure of how you do things. That's okay too.
So we have a question in the chat. I'm lying, I lost it. I had found it and then I lost it. Specifically asking if there are any artists that you know of in the disabled community that we can take a second to lift up and celebrate in this space. So I don't know if anyone knows, Keith Jones is hip hop and he's a rapper and he has a whole clique of folks and they're rappers. Alice Shepherd is a dancer and actually just won an award with AUCD last fall. I don't have anyone else offhand that I could just be oh, boom, there they are, because I normally just they're just my people. Sorry, y'all.
Yeah, Sins Invalid, which is another arts group, as well as Kinetic Light, which I'm always hyping them up because I never seen anything like them in my entire life. As well as Axis. Axis was probably one of the first mixed disability and non-disabled dance group. So they are amazing and beautiful. So really try to follow as many of these artists as possible.
I'm thinking about Jennifer Masumba. She's an artist. She writes songs and music. There's so many that's coming to mind, but that I can't remember their names. A lot of deaf artists, dancers and the like. The whole crew on the Black Futures, Sophia Eshe, and and some of the others. Gosh, just those are the ones I can kind of think of now. All kinds of writers, and whatnot. I've been thinking about Amanda Gorman. She has disabilities as well, and she's an amazing poet, and she's so young, 22 or whatnot. So Leroy, I'm thinking of Keith Jones and Leroy Moore, that they started Crip Hop, and that between them, they're getting, into various countries, the UK, South Africa, Uganda, all kinds of, there's all kinds of disabled artists and disabled artists of color out there, to lift up, because, art seems to be kind of white in nature. And so definitely wanting to lift up those folks of color. Yeah.
I didn't mention Maysoon, but she's a comedian and she's hilarious. Maysoon Saeed, she has, there's a TED Talk that she has called I Can, but she's been trying to be an actor for the longest. She's just been chugging along and getting in a lot of spaces. There is a comment here that I'm going to read, and then we'll close, and then it hits at 8 o'clock actually, but there is one question. So I can either read the comment or ask the question. Y'all tell me which one you'd like.
You're in charge here, Jeiri.
All right, no preference. So we'll do a little bit of both. And for those of you who can stay, I really appreciate that because we do respect your time. The comment is coming from Anita Hollander. As a national chair of SAG performers with disabilities, I've been fighting for more inclusion in TV, film, theater, and all media for 40 years in Hollywood, New York, and throughout the world. I agree with all that's been said, but I also want to add that we have triple disability employment in TV, theater, and film in the past 3 years, and we continue to fight. She says, I actually worked for the past three, I actually worked briefly at Jiva. I'm glad you mentioned characters who happen to be disabled because the actor happens to be disabled, not having to be a part of the script. I played a landlady recently on the FBI Most Wanted who happened to have one leg because I happen to be disabled. The Oscars this year have finally decided to add audio description because there are finally nominees with disabilities, including a diverse group from Crip Camp, the documentary. I continue to fight for diversity of all types in all media, and I particularly want to thank Anita Cameron for all that she's done. And the last question with which we will close on, how can we as educators do better to talk about intersectionality and disability, especially in rural, smaller areas where there might be not as much diversity or we ourselves cannot relate as easily and do not want to offend the community or overstep?
So, one, I also want to shout out Anita, who paved the way for folk like myself. You know, we don't see and hear the voices of Black disabled individuals who was there on the streets, crawling up, you know, those steps of the Capitol. And so just thank you so much, you know, for always highlighting our voices who keep getting lost in history. So really, really appreciate you, Anita. You need your flowers and your props, so I won't give it to you today.
Thank you. I'm humbled. so much, you know, and I just want to lift, you know, I try to lift up, you know, other folks, those younger folks, you know, lift up folks coming behind me. You know, we got generations of, you know, of folks. And so I just want to lift up, you know, I want to lift up those folks coming, you know, I mean, you know, it ain't about me. I just an ordinary person that had no idea where I was. I wound up in a totally different life from what I was shooting for. I was actually went to med school and was going to become a doctor and lost a lot of eyesight and got myself, you know, sidelined into another career. And I think that this is, you know, being able to educate and to put body and whatnot on the line and watch, you know, this more activists, disabled activists, you know, activists of color coming up and getting out in these streets and doing, you know, what we need to do, you know, out here. Yeah, that's what it's all about.
Thank you. Thank you for demonstrating what Black love looks like in public.
Yeah.
Putting your body on the line for us. I don't want to forget the question. I think rural communities have to really understand what accessibility looks like within the context of their own communities. There's actually a lot of disabled people in rural communities, particularly those who are autistic, but also those who might have had some sort of accident, etc. A rural community tends to be a nice, quiet place with a lot of space so that you can just be without having to be bothered. So I think like you might have more disabled people than you actually think. And so ask, that's one. Two, find out what other rural communities have said and what their needs are. You know, do that accessibility audit of yourselves and say, like, are we actually making this inclusive as possible? And then just do it, right? And so I think rural communities have that long history of knowing how to band together in order to help other individuals, what that means to share when you don't have a lot. And so really relying on that is what's going to get you to that inclusiveness. So you have to utilize those strengths. And I think less worry about offending people and more worry about how to uplift people in ways that they can be honored. So lead with the questions, right? But always know that there's already been things said that if you haven't done, you should do. And then always ask, like, how are we doing as you do it?
And this, Anita, rural communities are in a way like urban communities. They contain, a lot of different folks. So you may have people with disabilities. Um, you may also have people in the LGBTQ community. So there's your intersectionality, going on. You may have people living in poverty. You may have people, in rural communities who are at, different intersections of oppressions, and you may not know, because you may not necessarily know, disability may be a little more hidden, or LGBTQ status may be a little more hidden or whatnot in rural communities, but they do. We exist in all those communities, and so whereas on the face of it, your community, rural communities may be a little homogeneous, but really, I mean, you can't have humans without some form of intersectionality. So,
And I would add to that. So I think that Luticha and Anita did a great job saying, like, it is in your community, whether or not you recognize it, because not only are some disabilities invisible, but some people in rural areas with disabilities become invisible by not being able to access their community, right? Like, rural communities are pretty notorious for being inaccessible. So you may have people with physical disabilities in your community who just stay at home and feel invisible because they can't get out and access that community. But I think a good way to introduce intersectionality and disability to students, if you're an educator, is share our stories. Anita's story is out there and should be out there more. You could share that. You could share age-appropriate literature and art that is created by disabled people. Please don't share books about disabled people that were written by non-disabled authors. That is only going to create more stereotypes and tropes about us that we don't need being passed on for generations. But there are great books written for all age levels that come from the disability community. Alice Wong's book came out, and that is a compilation of lots of different people's stories. Kia Brown recently came out with a book, and there's books from kindergarten all the way up. So I really encourage you to look into art and literature that is created by disabled people and not about disabled people, but not created by us, because you're not going to get the story that you need.
I would just close and add on to everything that you all said, that really you just have to be intentional. I think that a lot of this work is about being intentional in what you're doing and what you're saying and the message that you're putting across, because there are people out there who can assist you, right? It's a matter of maybe a Twitter search, a Facebook search, a social media search, but you have to be intentional about what you're willing to talk about, because if you don't talk about it, then you're willingly not seeing it and not acknowledging its existence. And that's where we kind of have fallen societally, right? Like, we don't see things, so it's not our problem. We don't talk about them, so it's not our problem. So you have to truly be intentional. And I think that kids ask better questions than adults, because they're curious. They're naturally curious, and they just want to know, right? A kid will walk up to me and say, "Oh, what does this button on your chair do?" Like, an adult wouldn't ask, but they'll be curious. A kid will walk past my car and be like, "Oh my God, Ma, that's a transformer." And then now that's an opportunity, right? Where, we can talk about it. So it's really about being intentional about the information you're willing to share. And so I guess we will end on that. Thank you so much, everyone on the panel. I really appreciated being able to be your moderator and to share my bit and pieces of information with you all. I think you all did a great job. Thank you, everyone, for staying a little bit longer. We respect your time. You can find us all on social media. We are all on the Facebooks, on the Instagrams, on the Twitters. You can find us all if you're interested in reaching out to us further. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but if you need me, call me, pretty much like impossible. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Please feel free to give some love to our incredible panelists here in the chat. On behalf of Jiva, I want to apologize once again. I know I put it in the chat, but I want you to see it in my face, and that I am deeply sorry for the harm that it caused, that we didn't have closed captioning available at this event. It is a priority to rectify this as soon as possible so that we don't cause that harm or create that level of inaccessibility again. And I want to thank you for staying with us tonight. If you haven't spent an afternoon yet at the Rochester Museum and Science Center to check out the Changemakers exhibit, please do. You have until the middle of May. And if you enjoyed tonight's conversation, we have 2 more coming up. Tomorrow night, we'll honor Earth Day with a climate justice conversation featuring Chandra Maracle, Kristen Walker, and Tanya Noel Stevens. That'll be moderated by Dr. Kate Mariner. And a week from tonight, we'll have Rachel de Guzman, Wanda Martinez John Cox, and Sadie Fisher in conversation about anti-racism and inclusion, moderated by Dr. Irma McLaurin. Once again, I want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our wonderful panel. Stay safe and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good night,
y'all.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you.